Right now, the Dallas Cowboys find themselves in one of the most intriguing positions of the offseason. And if you're really paying attention, you can feel that this is not just another routine reset. There's a sense that things are being reshaped in a different way, not necessarily louder or flashier, but with a level of intention that deserves a closer look. The roster is shifting. Decisions are being made with both the present and the future in mind, and some of those choices are already starting to raise eyebrows across the fan base. One of the subtle but interesting developments comes from a move that, at first glance, might seem minor, but actually reveals how cautious the front office is being. Josh Butler's situation is a perfect example of that. Instead of going with the standard route, the team structured his deal in a way that provides a bit of protection in case injuries become a factor again. That tells you everything you need to know about how the Cowboys are evaluating risk right now. They are not just looking at talent, they're weighing durability, availability, and how much security they need when committing even smaller contracts. At the same time, we're seeing some departures that, while not headline-grabbing, still play a role in shaping the depth and identity of the roster. Jalen Tolbert, moving on after what felt like an up-and-down trajectory, is one of those cases where opportunity meets reality. He entered with expectations, flashed at moments, but ultimately found himself needing a fresh start. Now, he lands in a situation where he might get more chances early on, but the pressure is still there to prove that he can be more than just a rotational piece. That kind of short-term deal says everything about where he stands in the league right now. Wayne Thomas, on the other hand, represents a different kind of battle. His path has always been tied to special teams value and fighting for a roster spot rather than locking down a defined role. Deals like the one he signed are not about security, they're about survival. Every snap, every rep, every preseason showing becomes critical. And for the Cowboys, letting players like that walk is less about losing production and more about reshuffling competition at the bottom of the roster. Now here's where things get even more interesting, because when you step back and look at the bigger picture, the Cowboys are not positioning themselves to gain anything from compensatory picks in the near future. For a franchise that has in the past been very aware of that system and how to use it, this shift stands out. There's a real chance they walk into the next draft cycle without gaining any extra selections from those formulas, and that alone tells you they are prioritizing something else this time around. And honestly, that might not be a bad thing. If anything, it suggests that the team is not holding back moves just to play a long-term numbers game. In previous years, you could argue that certain decisions were influenced by the idea of balancing incoming and outgoing free agents. This time, it feels different. It feels like they're more focused on building the roster they actually want, rather than managing assets through a formula that may or may not pay off down the line. Still, not everything is settled, and that's where the tension really starts to build. There are players still on the market, familiar faces that fans recognize, and the big question becomes whether it makes sense to bring any of them back. Dante Fowler is one of the names that keeps coming up, and his situation is complicated. Not long ago, there was a clear argument for keeping him around, especially considering how he could fit in certain defensive looks. But things have changed, both in terms of personnel and scheme direction. His production drop is impossible to ignore, but context matters here. When a defense struggles to create the right situations, even players who rely on momentum and pressure opportunities can see their numbers fall off quickly. Add in reduced playing time, and suddenly the stat line doesn't tell the full story. The question now is whether the Cowboys believe that version of him can still exist in a new setup or if they've already moved on in their planning. Because when you look at the current edge group, it's clear that there has been an intentional effort to reshape that room. New additions, internal adjustments, and positional tweaks are all pointing toward a different kind of rotation. There's youth, there's upside, and there's also a sense that the team wants to keep developing players within its system rather than relying too heavily on veterans who may not align perfectly with the new vision. That doesn't mean there isn't space for another impact player, because there probably is. But it does mean that every roster spot now carries more weight. Bringing someone back isn't just about familiarity anymore. It's about fit, flexibility, and long-term value. And when you start to evaluate it from that perspective, the decision becomes a lot more complex than just asking whether a player has produced in the past. At the same time, there are other names floating around that once seemed like strong candidates to return, but now feel increasingly unlikely. Scheme changes can quietly close doors, even for players who were previously seen as priorities. When a new defensive approach comes in, it doesn't just tweak responsibilities, it can completely redefine what the coaching staff is looking for at each position. And if a player doesn't match that vision, the separation can happen faster than expected. All of this creates a very specific kind of uncertainty, not the chaotic kind, but the strategic kind. The Cowboys are clearly evaluating every angle, from depth to contracts to future flexibility, and while that may not produce immediate headlines, it sets the stage for some very important decisions in the weeks ahead. And as all of these moving pieces continue to take shape, the focus naturally shifts to the players who are still in limbo, the ones whose futures with the team haven't been clearly defined yet. This is where things start to feel a bit more tense, because decisions here are not just about depth or rotation. They can directly impact how competitive this roster will be when the season begins. There's still several names on the board, and each one represents a different kind of question the Cowboys need to answer. Some of these players were never expected to return in large numbers, and that reality is becoming clearer by the day. The idea of bringing back a large group from this free agent class has quietly faded, replaced by a much more selective approach. Instead of trying to maintain continuity across the board, the team appears to be prioritizing specific roles, filling gaps where needed, and allowing the rest to be resolved through competition or new additions. It's a shift that puts more pressure on scouting and development, but it also opens the door for unexpected contributors to emerge. When you look at the offensive line depth, for example, there are still a couple of names that could be brought back simply for stability. These aren't players expected to headline anything, but they provide insurance, familiarity with the system, and the ability to step in if injuries start to pile up. Those kinds of decisions rarely generate excitement, but they're often the difference between a unit holding together or falling apart when adversity hits during the season. On the defensive side, the uncertainty feels even more pronounced. There are veterans whose roles have diminished, specialists who may no longer fit the direction of the scheme, and younger players who are still trying to prove they belong. It creates a situation where every evaluation has to be precise, because keeping the wrong player or letting the right one walk can quietly affect multiple phases of the game. Special teams, in particular, becomes a major factor here, because that's where many of these fringe roster battles are ultimately decided. There's also the reality that some eras simply come to an end, even if it feels a bit overdue. Longtime contributors who carved out very specific roles may not have the same value in a changing system. And when that happens, the transition can feel abrupt. It's not always about performance declining dramatically. Sometimes it's just about the team evolving in a different direction. And when those paths no longer align, tough decisions follow. While all of that is unfolding, another layer of the offseason is quietly developing behind the scenes, and that's the potential for contract extensions. This is where the front office has to balance recognition with restraint, rewarding performance without compromising future flexibility. One of the most interesting cases right now involves a player who has quickly established himself as one of the most reliable at his position, yet is still navigating the business side of the league. The negotiations in that situation reveal a familiar pattern. The team appears to be cautious, setting a value that reflects their internal structure, while the player's side is aiming higher, looking to reset expectations and take advantage of a rising market. This kind of gap doesn't always mean a deal won't get done, but it does suggest that the process could take time. And the longer it stretches, the more attention it draws, especially if the player continues to perform at a high level. It's also a reminder that certain positions, even those that don't always dominate headlines, can still become major talking points when elite performance is involved. When someone consistently delivers, the conversation shifts from whether they deserve an extension to how much that extension should be worth. And once that line is crossed, negotiations tend to become more complex because now you're not just paying for past production, you're projecting future impact. At the same time, There's another situation developing that carries even more potential for drama. When a player is operating under a temporary designation and long-term security hasn't been established, it creates a unique kind of pressure on both sides. The team has leverage in the short term, but the player holds the ability to push back, delay participation, or create tension if progress isn't made. It's a delicate balance, and one that can easily spill into the public conversation as deadlines approach. What makes that scenario even more intriguing is the way both sides seem to be positioning themselves. There are signals being sent, subtle at times, but noticeable enough to suggest that neither side is in a rush to concede ground. The team appears comfortable with the idea of letting things play out, while the players' camp may be preparing to test just how far that patience will go. And when you combine that with the timeline of key off-season milestones, it sets the stage for a situation that could evolve quickly. As the weeks move forward and the next major checkpoints begin to approach, the tension surrounding these decisions is only going to grow. Every move, every report, every shift in tone will be analyzed, because at this stage, even small developments can hint at larger outcomes. The Cowboys are navigating a complex landscape right now, one where roster construction, financial planning, and on-field expectations are all tightly connected, and how they handle these remaining situations could ultimately define the direction of the entire season. And beyond the contracts and roster spots, there's another layer to all of this that can't be ignored, and that's the internal competition that's about to intensify. When a team makes this many calculated adjustments without locking in every position, it creates an environment where nothing is guaranteed. Younger players start to feel that opportunity is real, not just something said in meetings, and veterans understand that their margin for error is getting smaller. That kind of atmosphere can either elevate the overall level of play or expose weaknesses that were previously hidden. This is especially true in position groups that have been reshaped the most. When new faces arrive and roles are redefined, chemistry doesn't just happen overnight. It has to be built through repetition, communication, and trust on the field. Early struggles are almost inevitable in these situations, but how quickly the group respond will say a lot about the coaching direction and the leadership within the locker room. If the pieces come together, it can create a more dynamic and unpredictable unit. But if it doesn't, the inconsistency can become a real issue as the season progresses. Another factor that starts to come into play here is how the coaching staff adapts to the personnel they now have. It's one thing to bring in players that fit a vision, but it's another to maximize what they actually do best once they're on the field. Adjustments during the offseason are important, but the real test comes when schemes are put into action against live competition. That's where flexibility becomes crucial, because even the best plans need to evolve when reality doesn't match expectations. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on the Dallas Cowboys. Feel free to share your thoughts on the news in the comments as well. Whispers around the Dallas Cowboys facility are growing louder, and one name keeps surfacing with increasing frequency: Devin Bush. What once felt like a distant possibility is now being discussed internally as a legitimate short-term solution to reinforce a roster that many believe still lacks the physical edge required for a deep postseason push. Sources close to the situation suggest that the Cowboys front office has been quietly evaluating linebacker depth, searching for a player who can bring immediate intensity and sideline-to-sideline speed. Bush, a former first-round pick with a reputation for aggressive play, appears to fit the profile Dallas is currently prioritizing. While no formal move has been announced, the growing buzz indicates that conversations, whether direct or exploratory, may already be underway. The potential fit is intriguing. Bush's ability to read plays quickly and attack gaps could inject much-needed urgency into the defensive unit. There's also a belief within league circles that a change of environment might unlock a more consistent version of a linebacker, something the Cowboys could capitalize on if they decide to move forward. Of course, questions remain. Durability concerns and recent inconsistencies have followed Bush in recent seasons, raising doubts about whether he can truly be the stabilizing force Dallas seeks. Still, the Cowboys are no strangers to calculated risks. especially when the upside aligns with an immediate need. For now, it remains speculation, but increasingly credible speculation. And in a league where timing is everything, the idea of Devin Bush landing in Dallas is no longer just chatter. It's a scenario that feels closer to reality with each passing moment. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Dallas Cowboys, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We always look forward to your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.